I finally finished today Mariah Carey's The Meaning of Mariah Carey, #1 New York bestseller. I think this is probably one of the biggest, most reading I've ever done on any book. I read also a book on Kim Handler's, which I can't remember exactly his name, but it was a World War II guy who created Auschwitz, the architect, and his family and the people that were involved in the Holocaust. But that was a pretty big, long book, but the words weren't as tiny as this, and so it's a lot of reading. But I finally finished this book. I can't believe it. I finished this book. Hopefully it'll bring me some good charm to complete my GED. So talking about this book, I will make this video about this book and you know, my thoughts on it. I thought it was pretty interesting. Obviously, you know, it's kind of a broad, that's kind of a broad statement, right? Well, you know, there's all kinds of ideas that I kind of get from reading this. What the person really wants people to know. You know, obviously being as famous as long as this person has, that's really seems like what they only understood in life. And as glamorous and as accomplishing this individual is, it's interesting. It's very absorbing when you understand the type of racism that she said that she experienced with, like, you know, the Ku Klux Klan type of people that were showing up, and how her dad got charged with rape when he was in the military, and he felt like grabbing a gun and killing the guys or whatever, or shooting himself. I think he said grabbing a gun and going back and killing these people. Felt like shooting him for a second, trying to everything to withdraw himself from doing that, because they had incarcerated him for a short period of time just because he was black, and it was a white woman that got raped, so they just went after him, to his dad's speedster favorite car that he was always tuning up and fixing, to his Mariah Carey always with her father singing, or you know, in the car on road trips, singing songs, particular type of songs, and how her dad didn't really accept the ideas of the accomplishments that a singing career could possibly bring. It wasn't something in the books for him, for his daughter. How he was there for a short period of time for the first years, up until like 6 or 7 years old, and she was moving to all these places, and how her mother was taking her sort of to these random places. It sounds like she came from a very dangerous childhood where a lot of pedophiles, drug addicts, you know, dangerous people was around her quite a bit, and mother didn't have very much luck. And one story that I'm thinking of from Mariah Carey, when she says that one of her mom's boyfriends thought that he was like a veteran or something like this. I think she said that he was like a veteran, and he was a very nice guy. He was one of her favorites, or one of her guys that she enjoyed for a moment, short-lived moment. It was one of her mom's boyfriends, and they were living in a house, and he would swing on her, and he had given her a kitten, a cat. Well, this guy, you know, she says that this guy apparently was kind of on edge and scary, and her parents, literally, her mom's got up her all this stuff and her daughter very quickly in her car and took off and never returned. And talking about, you know, this guy was holding a shotgun to his head, and, you know, in the living room with one dim light, you know, kind of just leaning over saying, "You're never going to leave, or I'm going to kill you," or something like that. And Mariah Carey's having to go back for her cat, you know, look for a few belongings, and sounds like a very scary situation where a firearm was going to be used to kill, I guess, the wife or whatever. But understanding how she lived like above the Chinese restaurant, you know, in New York, and how her brother was constantly getting into fights with her dad, physical, full-blown fights. There were real nasty fights. She seems to express a lot that her older brother was real violent. And the best understanding that I understand that is that, it's a form of protection, and it's a form of, when you live in really hostile environments, people will take advantage of you, and it probably could have even protected her from any predators that came around, because of the person that's willing to do something. And I can relate that to my childhood for what I did with my brother and for him. But I was robbed of all this credit that I had ever done, and had give it to someone else. But anyway, Mariah Carey said she lived in a shack, what she referred to as a shack, which was something, I think, near a beach somewhere, but it was poor, broken homes. How she seemed very distant from her mother. Racial prejudice seemed to be a very big issue with Mariah. Her mom was white, her dad was black, and she was stuck right in the middle. She talks about her hair kind of being frizzy. She always wanted the hair like you see in commercials, but couldn't get her hair like that because she was, half. And she always dreamed of having to afford the cosmetics to make her hair the way she saw in the commercials. Or, growing up as a kid, she never saw cartoons. She had very little cartoons in the childhood experience because it was very dysfunctional. But like I said, her mom liked calling the cops, and always tend to use sort of this white presence of, I'm white, I can get away with anything I want and do anything I want because I'm white, and I'm, the white, what do they call it? They call that, I can't remember what it's called. I know we all colored people know exactly what that is, but white privilege. That means that they just use this white privilege token throughout their entire life, why they always should get open doors for them first. And it's always like that. And it's true. But the fact that she's half black and her dad is half black, it kind of stuck her in a very racial, confused place to where she existed in the world. And she talks about, obviously her singing as a kid. She excelled. She extremely says that she excelled, which I believe very much. Stop! She excelled very much in this, which makes perfect sense in the book, in writing and reading, because obviously she does writing and singing and stuff. She said that it was always something that of all the subjects in school she excelled in drastically. Which makes sense, she's singing songs and doing a lot of reading and writing because that's what they do, right? Singers. But she was very in tune with music at a very young age. She had a grand piano, upright piano, that she grew up having in her house, that she ended up finding again, restoring it again, and how she talks about, if I remember, it's hard to remember some of the really graphic details of this because she talks about going to the piano and she sort of plays these key tones. She plays these key tones and these key rolls of the piano, and it brings the chords of her life that she remembered in her life when she was younger. Her mother was an opera professional, accomplished singer. Her mom was very argumentative of who was accomplishing in singing, because Mariah and her had conflict. Obviously they're both singers, but Mariah Carey hit the scales of total stardom, and ultimately her mother wasn't the success of what she wanted in her own dreams as well. But it's interesting to know the dysfunctions of her mother, and what her life was probably like, and it seemed like she was gathered and protected by the black community very well and supported, because there was a lot of white people constantly coming around her that was always like, well, you're white like us, but you're not really like us. And so, it was very dysfunctional mentally to her. She had, she talks about having a lot of people in school being prejudiced to her and ganging up with a bunch of white girls, and it was a black community that protected her and showed up in a rival gang in the fields and protected her and said, "Don't worry, we got your back." And they protected her. They gave her ground. They gave her an open road. And then she talks about, being a little kid, teenager, and her friends literally plotting against her. Her friends plotted against her. She was a teenager. Said, "Oh yeah, we're all gonna have a good time, a girls' night out or whatever. What little girls, what teenagers girls do. Gonna have a slumber party and yada, and there's like 5 or 6 girls, and they go to this house, and they're all her friends. And as soon as she gets to this house, they close the door, everything turns quiet, and they all circle around her, and they start calling her nigger." Which she particularly, she kind of looks black, but, the skin tone, hair, eye color, I guess it's all in reference to people, to what, what color is, but apparently, she thinks somebody was going to save her. Nope, nobody came and saved you. She talks about that, how it was really bad, made her cry. But her father to me, as little as the amount of time that she spent with her father, she seemed to have had a very positive impact by this guy. Like, he was a very, he made her feel protected, like a little girl supposed to feel. And he seemed to have done that really well. Like, I get the ideas as I'm reading the book, as they're driving their roadster, and the wind is blowing, and a song would come on and sort of just hum a little bit of the things the tones and the singing. Or how she talks about her dad, who was a very neat, tidy type of person. He was in the military, but his character of a person was very clean all the time and very neat and very organized. And she talks about, like, her dad was very formal in a way that when he showed up, when he was there, on a couch, and she'd ask, "Oh, can I have a snack, something to eat?" And he would pull out the Ritz crackers, pull out one single Ritz cracker and give it to her in her hand, and fold everything very nicely, perfect, and close the box and set it next to her. Out of all the, truffles of crackers, of Ritz crackers, for those that know what Ritz crackers is. So he was very conservative, always seemed to have understand that work was something that of that nature, but he was holding a lot inside of all the prejudice that had happened to him. But like I said, in my opinion, I guess from the stories that she says, having a roadster car, when I think of poor, I just know that, people that are poor don't own a roadster car. They don't even have cars. They don't even get a choice to have a roadster car. It seems like a fairly expensive car, but I don't know the era of time. She talks about her dad's death, which, that to me, I think out of the whole book, was probably the most important. Which she talks, not the most important, but one of the most important. She talks about her dad's death and how he developed cancer, and the ideas that her dad developed cancer and he was slowly withering away, and as he was dying, her brother, Morgan, I think his name is, he didn't want to even see him as he was dying of cancer. The vulnerability and victimizing of what they had done to each other was too awful, even in his dying moments, and he didn't want to be. His father didn't want to be scrutinized by the Holy Bible as he was dying. He believed in God very much, but he just didn't want that part of his life to be, basically thrown in the holy water and crucifix, and you die. And he could no longer really tell in his dying moments, talk anymore. And he would just signal how much, because he was all against drugs. He never smoked, did drugs, very clean-cut person, but he ended up stopped smoking cigarettes at a very a very young age, just cold turkey, just stopped doing all that stuff. But he wasn't abusive in drugs. It wasn't something he did. So for him to take morphine when he's dying of cancer was an idea that he doesn't want to get involved with these drugs, because it's against sort of God. But as he was, talks about certain body gestures that he gives to a little bit of morphine, a little bit less, or that's enough. But to me, it seems the character of Mariah Carey, in order for you to be able to leave your father like that and just show up every once in a while, that's a very different lifestyle. I'm not blaming her. I'm not saying what this person is, because I don't know this person personally. This is a book. There's a lot of psychology to how books are written, what you want to understand, what we read, and how we perceive the world. I don't understand this person's life, but it's nothing but gold glitter and a lot more pain than most of us understand. But she seems to have visited her father in her dying moments and was able to live his last days out very comfortably in the living room. And he made it very clear that he didn't want to have persecuted with biblical practices as he's dying, to have a good, peaceful death in peace of his own terms of belief in God, which I believe is very beautiful, in my opinion, because I have been persecuted with the crucifix in the Bible by these people and what they did to me. And I believe in God. I grew up going to church just like that. I think that was very beautiful and very kind. But I do think to myself also that is the value of what life brings an understanding to, is, you're doing all these accomplishing things, and then that person leaves out of this world. Everyone has a different faith of what happens, if there is what happens, and who gets there and who doesn't. What's the understanding of the higher power? We live in a very bad world, very horrific, and what people have done beyond anything that our minds can comprehend, and why a higher power would allow things to such monstrous acts, and why some of us make it, some of us don't, and some of us get the horrific burn to death, to crisp, to someone else getting all the glitters and glamour and being cherished for the horrors that someone else had done just to give those things to them, and they did it through evil. We don't understand, but I think that, Mariah Carey grew up somewhat pretty religious, reading the Bible, going to a Bible camp study, taking notes. She started to read the Bible to her father for a period of time, and so as far as this goes, it's pretty wild. She talks about a possible sexual molestation as well. She talks about her sister, drugging her up and leaving her on the couch, and she wakes up and she doesn't know what happened. And her, it sounds like, she didn't say she was raped or didn't say anything, but it sounds like that could have possibly happened to her. Somebody drugged her up and possibly did something, or maybe molested her, and she didn't know. But it sounded like that was maybe something someone did. But not saying maybe they did, but, or when she was a little girl and she's going to the movie theater and her sister's boyfriend takes her to the drive-in movie theater and then starts trying to make out with her and kiss her, and how she was very scared and quiet and sort of never saw the guy again. And there was a guy that startled him because he was molesting her, and she knew that this was wrong. And this guy was so, like, she was like 11 years old or 9 years old, and this guy was like in his 20s, or like he was like in his 20s or late teen, like 19, 17, his early 20s, like 21 years old, and he's doing that. And she took a beauty salon study in school. So she went to beauty school for a little while to burn off time. She was doing a lot of vocal singing in the background. I think that one of the miraculous beauties of this story as well is that she talks about giving her mother a house. And she bought the old piano, or found the old piano. I don't remember if she bought it or found it or kept it somewhere in storage. And she refurbished the upright piano that she had, and she bought her mother a house, and she snuck in the old piano that they had that was like an ancient, not an ancient, but a memorial artifact that they remember in their house, and then took the piano into the brand new house to surprise her mother with the house. And there was the piano, and had it all tuned up. And one of the things that happened when she gave her the house, and she said that, and it was a real lavish house, right? It was like a cabin type of character house, like a kind of cabin wooded forest house. I guess that's the style that she understood her mother to be, it would like. The story was I think that she got her mom to sign a bunch of fake paperwork, claiming that I need you to sign all this paperwork. We're gonna get her mom had the piano. She was gonna get all tuned up, and it was to trick her to do the surprise for her. It was all set up. Everything was set up to do a big surprise for her. They drive her to this house. They walk into the house, and they're surprising her. And they see the photos on the walls, and it's pictures of her relatives. So she doesn't know when she's walking in the house, she smells this brilliant smell of a house, brilliant cooking food that they're making biscuits, biscuits and sausage or whatever, breakfast, some type of meal, and they're touring through the house, and her mom doesn't register. It's not clicking. And she walks through the house, walking upstairs, and she sees the photos. And the photos are her family, and she just kind of glazes at them, but it doesn't register that that's her or her family. But when she's going to this house, she doesn't think that Mariah Carey doesn't tell her mother that this is a surprise for her house. She just tells her it's something else. And so it was a really big surprise to buy her the house, and she got the whole, look in her eyes of, wow, look what I did for you. Surprise. That must have been very magical, because that's something I'll never do for my mother. Ken Cooper and Sarah Cooper already did that special surprise for my mother, bought her that house, and did everything. So as a son, I'm not really participated in that, but I do find it very beautiful for someone to do that. With my mother. I mean, with Mariah Carey's, own mother. But as far as anything goes with this particular situation is, she talks, her being in Sing Sing, which is legendary. I've heard about this place before because I watched documentaries about it. It's a prison. It's a maximum security prison in Long Island, New York, or some shit like that. I'm not familiar too many with the cities and ports of that area. But it's called Sing Sing, and the reason I know that it's called Sing Sing, she says in the book, was because the history of that penitentiary, maximum security prison, is known to have had a lot of singing. A lot of the black imprisoned inmates, like in slavery, they used to do in the work fields. They used to sing, and it would be kind of creepy to the perpetrators, and to find hope in God, to find hope of the suffering, as we know that the black community is known for for doing that, for doing some very, very incredible, inspirational things such as singing. It's the only group I've ever heard of life of any culture that did that. And they're very good at it. They're the best. You know, singing as the suffering of what was going on, raining water, for those that know what that is. And but she talks about she lived in this mansion that she first bought for like $30 million within 20 miles of like a couple miles from the prison or something like that. And she talks about she was in a prison within the first relationship with Tommy, Sony headquarters, highest manager, and he was like the kingpin of all of the ruling of power in the music industry, had the deepest connections of all, and this is during a very different time, so I am familiar with vinyl records. Back those days, vinyl records and CDs were material things that people bought, and so it's not like it is today. Back then they had to have trucks and U-Haul trucks and boxes to fill up and put them in stores, and they had to set up marketing tactics to try to sell the items to people and whatnot. So anyway, she talks about felt like she was in a prison, and she was always on camera. She was always having people stalk her. And she talks about her boyfriend with what is his name, Daryl Jexter, or I can't remember. He's a baseball player, and I think he was Puerto Rican, had a loving family. She snuck out with him in a rainstorm to go to his apartment, came back, jumped in the car and took off, ran away from security that was chasing her. When she's in the prison when she's in their mansion, she talks about, several artists coming over and they're sneaking out to go eat some french fries at Burger King, and all the SWAT teams with handguns and security guards are frantically searching for her. There's those little kinds of stories, that adds to the details of what this person's life was like. But she talks about her sister, her sister being a prostitute, and was very disloyal, and at one point through boiling hot water, she got third-degree burns all over parts of her body because her sister seemed to have been very traumatized. For those that know, I read her book and saying that her sister was HIV positive. That her sister had become HIV positive. She had a really bad relationship with her sister. There were some good moments, but it was really bad for the most part. She was around a lot of dangerous people, drugs, seeing white powder. She had a pager. That meant only drug dealers, pimps, and people that lived that dangerous life had pagers. She would take, Mariah Carey to these mysterious houses with this boyfriend of hers, and was trying to sell her for sex. Those are some pretty frightening moments as a child, as I can relate very well closely to being sold for sex, and smuggled and pinned down to do that as well. Not to do as well, but to be influenced that that's what your value of life is for someone else. And but yeah, I think it was very touching to hear about the death of her father, and it really does make me think that when she talks about her father, and I just kind of phrased this earlier, is that's how life, well, that's what happens in life, is that, people have different relationships. I don't understand what her exact relationships were, her relatives, but the way that I grew up was very much different. And I say this because much of that understanding, as I understood, as she talks about, we went back to his house where he lived, and as tidy and neat as he was, they go back to the house where her father, who she saw pass away, and prepared his funeral, and he got cancer, and got the phone call that he wasn't seen to have been a big part of her life. He disappeared for many years. But I can see her struggles to always keep things positive in the little things that she was given in life, because she talks about when he's dying of cancer and they go to his old house to clean up all the debris and go find out what this person's life was like, is that he had all these magazines and photos. He had all these magazines and these highlighted parts and pictures that he had seen in People magazine and seen all in the articles of the world, and he was keeping up with what her life was like this way, as opposed to keeping in contact with phone calls and visiting. So that was particularly it sounded very sad. It sounded very sad, to go into somebody's house and, to me, you see what you call your father, and you do all these nice things. I understand this person's living in a totally opposite world, but they only understood Mariah Carey through magazines and the public eye, and for a very long time. So, but this person did mean a lot to them, and obviously there's just only a very small portion of what that story was of the relationship. So there had to have been so much more. But this person, her father, made her feel very special and not singled out, but it really struck a chord of understanding that that's how a lot of families are. People go on their voyages of success and they don't care. It's not that they don't care. It's just you just die, and that's it. You come back to this person and you sort of hold on to these glimpses of memories, and that's what a lot of people do, but at the worst scales of it, like they did to me. And but anyway, she tries the best to talk positive. She talks about having a miscarriage, having her twins. Stop! They keep shooting an electronic device into my chest with this electronic bolts. She talks about her cousin Vinny, and pictures of her childhood that she sees here. She moved out very young, at a very, very young age. And, she said that she never really felt she could be beautiful as a kid with all the sort of nice things and shampoos. She seemed very, very taking away from the natural childhood of not feeling like she was pretty from the adults, treating her like a half-ass, and which is I'm very familiar with as well. Is the fact that the teachers in school or other people knew she was half black, so they would sort of treat her different. Or when she was a little girl, she talks about writing a picture of her family and using crowns, and she uses a lot of color, dark black colors, to color her family. And she talks about this is one of the most worst experiences for a child to go through, right? Where the teacher grabs and looks at show and tell after the kids are scrambling to get the crowns to draw a picture of something important in their family. And after so much time passes by, 20, 30 minutes, an hour, she shows her picture, and the teacher goes over and looks over at the picture that Mariah Carey drew, and it's dark colored figures with a white mother, and used darker tones to fit the skin color that she is and hair color that she is. And the teacher starts bawling and laughing at her. "Who's that?" And started laughing because she was colored. And that's what the teacher did with a group of her other sidekick teachers. That's what they did to her as a little girl. She didn't understand why she was being humiliated in front of the entire class and other adults. And she was only in first grade and kindergarten when they did this. So, like I said, her mother's name's Patricia, and there's just it's a very good read. She had a lot of people. She had people in her life that really mattered, and it seems that she really did. She really did have to vouch for her life on her own very young. Um, her relationship, how with the Latin Elvis in Mexico, which was a guy that was treated like a god, and he seemed to always have a cloud hovering over him. To her brother eventually getting a degree, or Christmas, the police are being called and she's being thrown into a mental hospital, and she's totally exhausted from just staying up for hours and not getting any rest, and people are always depending on her to get things together. But I think that it was a good read. It was very long, and I'm glad I did read it. This is the first African American writer book, and she considers herself, that of black, inherits that from that ancestry. So that's the first time I ever read any book like that. I haven't read a whole lot of books, but most of them have been white women. This is the first one, and there's pictures of her here with, of her as a child, and she talks about living near on a swing set near a pile of trash. There's a big pile of trash, and she's swinging on a swing set as a kid, and she was always vouching to try to have a better life than the ones that she seemed to be living. Her mother, she says she was never really groomed a lot, like really groomed in hair care products and all these girly type of things by her mother as a kid. Her mother seemed very abandoning to me. That her mother didn't seem like she took care of her and paid the bills, but was pretty open to what she just wants to go and do and what she wants to go do. And she's a big Marilyn Monroe fan as her mother, and her mother also, Mariah Carey bought the actually original piano that Marilyn Monroe owned at some point, and it was actually Marilyn Monroe's piano in real life. So her always paying her bills, doing backup vocal singing, her experiencing smoking weed at least once, or getting secondhand smoke. But there's several stuff I could keep talking about. Her children, obviously, because I've seen a lot of documentaries. I've seen a lot of documentaries, stories for hours on her life. So some of this stuff wasn't in the documentaries that I read in this book. Her children, she talks very slightly about Nick Cannon, who was her baby's, her marriage and the father of her children. She talks about these sort of things in life that I think that she talks about the police showing up, and when she's a kid, and she was absolutely terrified of the fights that her mother and her father were going through. Her parents separated at a very young age, at a very, very, very young age. What she kind of felt like as a little girl, what her safety nets were. She talks about all she ever thought for Christmas was to have her family together and have her all family together, and that's what she really wanted, and to be very festive together that way. And that was pretty heart touching. when she talked about that, because she talks about, the struggles of, it wasn't so much of what Christmas material things, it was the fact that they were sort of underneath the Christmas tree together and being in great harmony. Talks about her standing on a coffee table in the middle of an argument of some kind and just starts singing to the top of her lungs, to the top of her musical ability. As far as her music ability goes, I kept up, I kept up with her pretty well. I am not very good with understanding the names of how many Grammy Awards and this song with this artist. I'm not really, that's too detailed for me. I just know that this person is very successful, Grammys, work with these artists, popular, what type of music they made, style, and that's pretty much it. But, you have to be born with that physical ability to sing those types of vocal cords. That is one thing. I understand that I don't know anything about the world of singing, okay, nothing. But I just know that for her to hit those notes that she's doing, you have to physically be born with those physical type of vocal cords and lung power and whatnot to do that. So it doesn't matter how well you can sing and harmonize, your physical body has to be built that way. So she was very gifted that way from the beginning, and then was blessed with the ability to harmonize and be intelligent enough to do all that. She's very articulate. She seems very articulate and very detailed of the music that she's creating. Like this isn't some sort of rap show. They just go to a studio and then, make, all these hits and stuff, and it's all simple and easy. She seems to put a tremendous thought and creativity in the music that she's making. Extreme creativity. Obviously, the subliminal messages, the secret messages, and personal life stories. And she talks about restoring her father's. Here's a beautiful story. She talks about restoring her father's speedster car to its original candy red apple color, and painting it and just making it real beautiful and having her son take pictures in it. That resembled what her father was so many years ago, driving her to the grocery store or wherever, and having a daughter-father moment. And I think that I think it's very, very. I think it's incredible to hear the stories. She talks about, so many different subjects that I'm trying to remember. But if I took a test, I could probably remember. If I had multiple choice question, because I try to retain as much memory that I can reading the book. Sometimes I have to read it over and over and over again on a certain page to understand what they're saying. In my opinion, I think it could have been written a little bit better, because it was a little kind of confusing to me in some parts, and it's not the literature, it's just the style of how the writer wants to tell the reader the story, because there's several different ways you can do that. But it was a good read, but it was definitely written in chapters of her life, and it sounds like to me that Mariah Carey, what she did is she wrote a bunch of notes throughout her life and these events in pages, and then she went to the writer, and along with her writer, put these chapters and these notes put these notes that she wrote about her life into chapters. And then, since Mariah Carey is such a gifted natural writer and in language arts, literature type stuff, obviously because she's a singer, it would have excelled her ability to work with the writer so that she can really excel in that, and making this book all come together. She talks real violently real bad about Tommy. I'm not familiar with. I just knew this person here in Glazley. His name. She married very young. She always talks about being under control, uh, being monitored. Any move and anything that she does, being monitored, cameras, people following her. She couldn't do anything, and she was always terrified of this guy because he had so much power over other people and over her and what was going to happen. So she talks about that, their marriage, and calling Thanksgiving off, and how she spoke up against him in front of a gathering that she really didn't do before, and so she gets up and leaves, goes to a club, but she, gets into an argument with him, which she seems very submissive to the entire relationship. So, it's, she talks about the freedom of all things, her broken down experience, visiting the president of Japan because she decided she has to leave to go to Japan to go and talk to the president of Sony Records, which was like Mr. Miyagi or something, some Asian Japanese guy who owned Sony Records, which was a step above Tommy. And obviously he's a record label owner. My assumptions is that's just the character of all record label owners. I don't know anything about that world. So she goes and sets up a visit with the actual owner in Japan with the president of Sony Records to go over her record deal, disconnect with him, which she doesn't like, and so on, because of the situation that she was going through. And so she talks about meeting the president, of Sony Records, because she was making these pieces. She made that company billions of dollars. She may have made hundreds of millions of dollars for herself, but they made something like in the $1 billion mark. The Sony Records did, like of all the products and toys and records and all the other sales that they make on behalf of Mariah Carey. They made, Mariah Carey is rich as she's wealthy. They made billions, but she got, $100 million, a couple $100 million. But anyway, she talks about, this whole house that she lived in, that she bought. It was a big surprise, and, it was a gated community, and there was a security guard at the front gates all the time, and she had a little hideout place in her large bedroom where she felt safe. She had a special wardrobe back closet area where she kept a lot of her photos of family members that kind of made her feel like she had a past at some point of her life. But I think that I just know that it's a very different life that I lived, and I don't understand that world. I really don't, and I don't think she understands the world that I could ever. A lot of people live in, because it's just very, very different. And it's not saying that it's bad. It's just I just know that it's a very different world and understanding of what you think life is, and how vulnerable, and how you have all these predators coming after your money. What she talks about that really struck a chord with me, with family, is that she said that her mother and her brother were going after her for money. Like, her mother and her father had her mother and her brother and her sister had, since they were the closest, the ones supposed to protect her, they didn't care about if you saw other people that were willing to go ahead and go after her throat for money. Her family also had no problem, she talks about, going after her for her money and going to see how they could take more control over her, because how to manipulate that. They're like, oh, hey, come, go and take a vacation over here with us. It'll help you heal yourself, and they'll arrange it, spending her money to do it. thinking that they care about her and they don't, and it's just one step closer into saying, oh, okay, now I get a chance to do and what's going to be best for Mariah, and she has less power over herself, and she talks about that as well, that her family tries to victimize her and take money and use her for money to get access to connections. She talks about her brother going into a hotel, and before she gets sent to a mental hospital, and she goes and finds her brother in a room with ass up, butt naked, and passed out from drinking his ass off. And she talks about that, and she seems more trustworthy of her brother than her sister. She seems very untrustworthy of her sister. That her sister, after she had thrown the hot water on her and burned her, and that was the last time that she was ever going to trust or desire that person in her life again. But she was taking her to all these places that were extremely dangerous, and she seems struggling to try to talk positive about the situation. But she says that she gave all her family members a lot of money. Like she said, it was never enough. She kept on giving her sister cars and money, and her mom a house and money, and it was never enough. She kept all these connections, they all just fed off of her, and it was endless amounts of money they gave her, and they didn't gave a shit. They just kept on using her, and they just kept on abusing the situation. Very familiar, because they did this to my mother. They did this to my father. They threw my father in a trash can, including my dad's sister, and that someone else made a profitable gain for a racial white movement that I didn't like. And still to this day, they do this to me. So I understand that very well, at least when it comes to that. That people are just using you for resources, and they're very distant, and they don't really care about your well-being. They just want to see what connections and things they can control you with and take your property and take your things. They really don't care about you and your mental state and what they know you're capable of doing for yourself, because it's just about sabotaging and taking for themselves, and you're searching for help and you're not finding it, because in the chaos of all the money and things, it's like her therapist said, to take a objective view look at things. How did they get all this money? How did they get all these treasurable things? They never had a job. They didn't go to work 8 hours a day, and you're giving them all these things, and you're getting all these treasures, and you're the one that's giving them, and that's, you're sort of causing the problem. That's why. So I was very interesting as well to hear that story, because you give her all these things and her family, and they, they're not working for it. They're never getting for their life for it. They just got all this free shit, and they just kept on taking. What else are you going to give me? And so that's why they don't really care for the interest in Mariah. So she talks about that. She always talks about not being able to trust anybody. But like I said, it's a book. It's a celebrity. There's 1,000 more things to it. I was a big fan of Mariah Carey growing up. I listened to a lot of her music, specifically with one of my neighbors, and I used to listen to Mariah Carey and the Heartbreaker songs and the Honey, and she talks about how some of the shoots were very difficult, working in the blizzarding hot sun, or she was in this mansion in like the Jamaica or Puerto Rico, I think it was, and to make the movie or the music video Honey, or OG, Old Dirty Bastard, ODB, which is the guy that passed away, real famous for that time, Fantasy, I think it was. But like I said, she talks about old Dirty Bastard being pissed drunk on the movie set entirely, and she said it worked so well. It was very authentic. She seems very real, in touch with the world of what's happening. When she talks about Old Dirty Bastard, and she talks about how raw he was about the world that we live in, because the glamorous life is always shown to be glamorous, and the truth is that people don't create the music in the world that they do, especially in her. It usually comes from suffering, and it comes from the pain that you see. It's not necessarily coming from all sorts of happiness. It comes strictly from the pain and suffering. This is how a lot of art, nearly all artists are, musical artists are, and painters. It's from suffering and pains, and you want to find an outlet to things. So, yeah, so, I was probably 9 or 10 years old when I first heard Mariah Carey, and she moved around a lot as a little girl, and talks about moving to Virgin Records, and seeing the guy that had started making out with her at a movie theater, which was her sister's boyfriend, and said that he showed up and he was creeping down the street really slow, and she hid behind like a trash can, and he just drove by and never saw him again, and she was playing with a bunch of other little girls her age. But I do remember her saying that she had a boyfriend in high school, and he was like 6'4", big, tall, built guy, and he protected her. And she was always searching for protection because she was so vulnerable by these people. She talks about her mother taking her to like a smoke bar, and there's all these guys like sort of playing music and gambling, and they're whistling and saying perverted shit, and she's going to these dangerous places. You can meet child molesters and shit like that. So she seems very vulnerable to predators. She constantly talks about she was very vulnerable of what could happen to her, and always looking for some type of protector, some type of hero, some type of. And then that's why she said she married Tommy. How she got into a relationship with some kind of really like a 6'4" giant guy that would scare away people, and so she only got with that guy for the protection of necessarily what his identity was as a person. So that's something that was always fulfilling to her. And she says that she has the unimaginable, witsy ability to talk her way into things. So she has the ability to talk very well. For good, bad protection, to attack, and hold her ground. She's the queen of this. But, yeah, so this book was written quite a while ago, at least a couple of years ago. I'm going to say this book came out in, 2015 or something like that. I don't even remember when this book came out, but it was somewhere in 2020, I think it was, because she talks about in 2019 breaking a few world records, the Elvis Presley record of #1 single or something like that. Yeah, so hopefully this resonates. Full hour talking about it. I may make another video on it, but I finished this book. I'm going to read some other books, and it's, I don't know if somebody changed the pages out of this. I don't know what the situation, but I read Mariah Carey's book. And one of the things that I think that influenced me to read this book was when I first moved into this apartment. I went outside and to smoke a cigarette, and I saw a beautiful black butterfly, and it was on the floor. And instead, I was like, maybe I should go pick it up, and I just let nature take its course, and didn't do anything, and just let it fly away on its own. And it was a butterfly that flew away. She's really big fans of butterflies. It was a beautiful butterfly with some like neon stuff on there, and it was on the ground, which is a very odd place in the area that I was in. And I thought Mariah Carey was sort of the butterfly effect. For those that know what the butterfly effect is, the whiffle of a wing can change dramatically and shift things in the entire side of the world, opposite sides of the world. Just a whiffle of a butterfly wing. That you have to be careful and you have to be aware of the power that you may hold. You don't think you really count in life, and you can send shockwaves to people. And I know exactly what that was for me, because I met Michael Jackson when I was 5 years old, the biggest pop star of any era, in my opinion. No one has ever played in front of more people as Michael Jackson at one time, and have those types of crying and screaming fans. The Michael Jackson chaos. And the day that I met him, I was with my father. He literally looked like he came out of a movie, exactly like you see him in the movie Thriller, and the movie Moonwalk. That's exactly what he looked like. And I remember I didn't know at this time, but I think when I look back on it 100%, it looked like he had just gotten off a concert playing in front of 100,000 people, singing and and he finished off the show by then coming to McDonald's and visiting me. That's what I believe what it looked, because he looked all dressed up like he was on a performance. He looked like in his secret car, like he was he was all outfitted, like his staging outfit he would have worn in a huge 100,000. And this is during the peak of the 1990. Okay, in the late 80s when this happened, the audience members and the Michael Jackson chaos was more crucial than any artist in the world. There's no artist in the world, so I know what that is. Having someone as powerful as that come didn't bless my family. It cursed it, and I had to say that, but it did. There was horrors that happened. There was not very few blessings that didn't come, and it didn't come toward me. It got rearranged. We were respective in our house. You couldn't have probably found a better family. We never spoke of this person, but we paid a very big price. For those that know the details, I will never know the details either, how awful they were. But anyway, it wasn't the person's fault. They just very influential to the entire generation of the planet, to 8 billion human beings. So I thought of the butterfly. Saw the butterfly, and it looked like it just came out of its cocoon, and was on a summer day when I first moved into the apartment. It was like the first month, I think it was, first month or two. But she talks about making the movie Glitter, and it was a total disaster. And I haven't seen the movie Glitter, but it's about her. I've seen, I think, a little introduction, I think, was Mariah Carey falls in love with a DJ of some kind. She falls in love with a DJ or a club DJ, and they start a romantic relationship of some kind. And that's all I know of it. It's a story about her falling in love with a DJ. So that's a very interesting. I'll probably go watch the movie. I'll probably watch the movie sometime this week and take a look at the movie. But it was a very big disaster in the movie, because obviously she talks about 9/11 slightly, and the tragedy that had happened, and where she was, and everything that happened with that, and where she was in her state of success and mental state, and keeping things positive and in a direction that's healthy. So she talks about her wedding being very lavish, to the extremes, and I think that life passes by very fast. I don't know if she has time to read, but she's a night owl, to my understanding. I think I saw that in a documentary. I don't know if I read that in a book, but she seems to have sort of indicate that slightly. She's sort of a night owl. She stays up a lot late at night, which I always used to like to do as well. You have these pictures of, when I look at these black and white pictures, it makes me think very much of my father, because my father grew up during sort of this era of time, and my father was born in 1925, and I knew the stories, and there was a lot of black and white photos that we had during this Navy and him traveling, and the racism, the racism that Mariah Carey talks about her dad and her life, I know very deeply and very well, in the persecution of prejudice. Even though the things that I had said, what I went through, what other people did to me, is at a scale that I not only stood for myself, because of what people did to me, that I had to do to them, my father explained to me. My father was born in a time where he had to ride on the back of the bus because he was not color fitted for white quality ruling, where he could not use the restrooms of a white person. My father drank from a dirty fountain, and he drank and he went to bathrooms of the colored people with the blacks. My father was not allowed to. And so he told me stories in real life of that. And my father passed away when I was 18. He was 80 years old. So the cars, when you talk about that ancient car, the speedsters, they were made out of steel back then. They were made out of steel and metal back in those days. They're not fiberglass like they are now. But back in those days, cars were made very differently. The eras of times and generations were very, very different. So, you take a look at these pictures and how many people idolize her. She met, Nelson Mandela, or, she met, the Prince, who gave her a Bible, who then, that the baseball player that she had puppy love with, she met at a fashion show, and he was actually looking to try to hook up with Mariah Carey, and Mariah Carey went into an apartment, and they were on the roof, laughing, looking at the stars, having a great time, having a merry, magical time, trying to run away from security, and it was raining, and her hair was all wet, and she ran back to the limousine and took off. She also talks about being in where she was with a bunch of rappers during a period of time in the 90s, early 90s, where total stardom. Now, rap and hip-hop is very different. I understand that, because first rap song I ever listened to, or one of the first rap songs that I recall and videos that I ever watched, was Whoop There It Is. And that was an old school that I remember seeing with one of my neighbors. And during that time, rap and hip-hop in New York was at its peakest. For a black person to be driving, or for a bunch of black people that she was with, driving a bunch of Lamborghinis and Rolls Royces and all these $100 million cars, was against all white rules. All white people don't want blacks to be in that. And now it's obviously very different, but during that time, it's like a racial movement. To see a black guy driving a Lamborghini during that time with a white girl, especially Mariah Carey, or not a white girl, but she looks sort of white, right, is very different. And it was like snobbing. The glory that she talks about was very invigorating. The glory that she gets from doing something like We Made It. The struggles and racism that I faced in it, we made it. We're driving, and she takes it into gear, and we're flying on the streets of New York, and these $100 million, $100 million vehicles all put together, and there's like 10, 15 cars, and that. It was kind of like this snobbing to the face of these white people that said, you can never have this, you can never have these nice things, and you don't deserve it, and you never get the will to live, and you're not going to go through, you're not going to penetrate any of what movement we did. And they were able to. You got to give it up to them. I'm Mexican, I grew up with tortillas and frijoles and fucking rice, and I can tell you this, there's no one else that can do it. I hate to say it, that it would have been nice to Mexican, my own heritage, done very accomplishing things, but Black people, African American community, they're the strongest gathering, and they had the ability to do music and athletics that is only the ability to pivot what pivot through this whole racism and persecution of what they did. They had the only ability to do that, regardless of the slavery and everything. The music that they create, the singing physical powers that they have of lungs, vocal cords, muscle tissue to push forward, gives them extra talent. Boxing, athletics, which puts him on a pedestal of, the Olympic gold medal winners during World War II, where you see Jesse James holding his fist up like this, saying, fuck you. But they just shot me violently in my neck. Where he's bowing his head down, saying in the Olympics, saying, for all the struggles of racism, all these white people get white privilege and open doors and don't understand what it is to be colored. And blacks obviously was this lowest scum she talks about that was considered in classrooms, and how they expressed this to her, that you understood the neighborhoods that you were in, that it's scaled down and black was the worst of the bottom barrel shit. But in order for things to change and give influence, they were able to do it, and the music was. And she was very protected by the black community. I believe and know that the reason she was successful was because of the black community. That was why she was successful, because they protected her, gave her opportunities. They were very family oriented. They've been doing this from the very beginning of time. There isn't one for the Hispanic cultures that pivots in the way music or athletics. We're not in football. We're nowhere. We didn't create ninja. We're just construction workers that just work for a living in the hot sun. But she was very protected. You got to give it to them that they're very family oriented with one another when it comes to accepting. It's like when you go to rap concerts, everybody still to this day, you're always welcome to hip hop and you're always welcome to rap. You're not welcomed at a country show, because they know they want to protect their white species and who gets in that culture. But hip hop is really for everyone. And the cowboys, white supremacists, that's for them, and then they pick out what they want and then shit on you. And it's very multiverse, and you don't see black cowboys. It's not very often. And but anyway, she seems very fond, and she seems to identify as a black woman. Even though she's half white, she identifies to me where how she expresses like she's a black woman. I think that it's her mom. She talks about her mom being a huge fan of Marilyn Monroe, and she saw a poster when she was a little girl, Mariah Carey of Marilyn Monroe, and was just glamorized, envied her, admired her tremendously. But hopefully this video makes some sense. Mariah Carey, I'm 41 years old, reading this book and about a musical artist. First book that I've ever read about a musical artist. First book I've ever read about a musical artist, a singer that I'm ever aware of any book I've ever read. And I was a fan just like everyone else, just a kind of different fan. I don't believe in going to concerts. You could never get me as a kid, growing up, as a teenager. I absolutely did not really personally desire to pay money to go watch somebody sing when I could just watch them on TV and listen to their music or purchase their music at a record store. But for me, I just did not have desires to go to worship someone else. That was just me. But I was a fan greatly of their music. Made incredible music. I enjoy their music. In fact, this one's a very heart-touching musical note that I can give for myself about Mariah Carey. When I was young, when I was DJing. I bought this track. I remember being 19 years old, and I was 18. I was late 18 years old, and I was going through so much pain. It was one of the most struggling parts of my life because I was young, and I was, had a classic anemia, and I remember being in this broken down car that looked like, that looked like a Porsche, and I know her dad's Porsche. I think it was a Porsche Roadster, but it kind of looked like a Porsche, but it was a Plymouth Laser. And I remember this one song came on out of the radios that I was listening to. I had to hit the radio just to get it to work because it was just. When you talk about the junk cards of the junkyards, you could go to a junkyard, and this was the worst car out of the junkyard you could possibly find. Like, I'm not kidding, it was bad. And this song came on, Mariah Carey, Make It Through the Rain. And I absolutely was so influenced by the pain of what I went through during that time, and I remember I was just feeling very magical when I listened to it. I said, wow, that's a very good track she made, but it was a dance track. It was the remix. It's not the original Make It Through the Rain. It's a Make It Through the Rain, but it was remixed with a house track, and I bought the record. I bought Mariah Carey's record because I don't ever buy artists like that, singers, ever for records. But I did for that remix, and there I go. I was running through the rain after my life changed in the most horrific way you can imagine at a college campus when the whole incident happened at Richland College. Nobody would ever hear the stories of what that felt like or really knew what it was because they're going to change it. But that was one record that I purchased. I did purchase one record from Mariah Carey, and it was Make It Through the Rain, and it was the record that I enjoyed. And I remember listening to it when I was 18 years old in my house that I was living in, DJing, and I'd play it off as a finishing track. And it was great. It was a wonderful track. Very deep bass lines, kind of clubby, not too clubby, but clubby. And she talks about, she talks about David Morales. David Morales, I know who David Morales is. I knew David Morales. This is during the era when dance music started to infuse with artists like Mariah Carey. This is whenever all the artists started to realize they can make a lot of money, and it was like the pop thing, and I remember that. It's the same thing with hip-hop started to infuse with house music, and they started having hip-hop lyrics to house. I know Mariah, she worked with David Morales, which is a big legendary house DJ, and which is like the best of dance musics, clubby sort of soulful dance music, because he worked with so many different artists. And I'm very familiar with David Morales and all the legendary DJs, Little Louie Vega, and the Masters at Work, and all the music that they've made. Very, very familiar with the music. I enjoy much of their music. I had a David Morales soundtrack record, and she talks about David Morales. So she mentions his name in this book. So, but she always talks about being lonely, in her life. She's always trying to make it happen, for the best of her life. But I heard her name at McDonald's once when I was in Lawrence, Kansas. I was getting some breakfast, and I think I was getting some sausage biscuits in the morning, and the register lady said Mariah Carey, and I don't know why she said that. And I just kind of looked at her, and I wasn't like disappointed, but to me, whenever I looked at that lady disappointing when she said that out of nowhere and it was a cash register lady, like they were trying to watch my reaction, the only reason was because what power do you think you're going to have over the gay community and what they've done? This is their show. They're the makeup artists, the fashion designers, the stage designers. That's their world. They're the president, owners of all that. Who gets in and out, who gets what. And that will never change, all the way for political power. I think what Mariah Carey went through in order to get to the business she was because of them, and was also because she pivoted a lot of suffering to get there, a lot of pain to get there, more than most of us want to deal with. And I find it influential that she's willing, as a woman, to pivot through that. I think she is a incredible featured woman, for sure. Because she's willing to seem to pave a way for the greater being of humankind, because guess who really owns and is running the show? And it's people like her that are heterosexual, straight, beautiful women that have a good mindset and mental state of well-being, the future of what people like me and other females can possibly do in life. And that it spreads a lot of messages to a lot of people. And the fact that she's an incredible singer makes it even much more better, because she's making more impact. She definitely says that she's always known this sort of destiny that she was supposed to arrive and what she was going to be when she gets older, her entire life. She repeats herself several times. Says, from the beginning, I always knew what I wanted to do, what I was going to become, and it was like a God-given message from God that she knew this is what she was supposed to do, and she was given like these sort of signs that this was going to be her destiny. At a young age, this was going to be her destiny. But like I said, there's so many stories and perspectives. You take a left, you take a right, there's different perspectives and different ideas. But she talks slightly, meeting other artists and what some of her experiences were, and in her life as a child. And one of the things that I really enjoyed reading this, I was trying to look for this section of the book that was on here, but it was written very beautifully and very well, and she talks about the dream house that she gave to her mother. I talked about this already, but the way that she wrote this and talks about the dream, if I find it, I'll read it again. But it's so beautifully written, and how she talks about buying her mother a house, a brand new house with all the money that she had. And then she says, no, well, that's my house that I bought. And how people were seen to be a tug of war to who was owner and who wasn't. Because they were manipulating Mariah Carey, and nobody was being grateful, and they were just squandering her for money. And that seems what everybody seemed to be doing. But there you go, I read the Mariah Carey book. And it was a long, long read. It was more pages than I've ever read in any book. I've never read a book. I mean, look at this. Look how tiny these letters are. I mean, it's a lot of reading. She begins to identify her parents, brothers and siblings, as ex-brothers, or she starts calling her mother Pat, or her Patricia. She starts calling her mother, instead of mother, she starts calling them by their first name. She becomes so distant from them because of the world that she lives in. But so there you go. It's all yours.